Martin Shkreli, unpacking America's most hated CEO and his impact. Martin Shkreli is a name that instantly divides opinion. To some, he is the epitome of greed and arrogance in corporate America, a pharmaceutical executive who became infamous for hiking the price of a life-saving drug overnight and then mocking the public outrage. To others, he is a symptom of a flawed healthcare system and a financial engineer who exploited the gaps between innovation, regulation, and profit. Understanding the full story of Martin Shkreli means diving into the mechanics of pharmaceutical pricing, the culture of biotech startups, and the complex relationship between Wall Street and medicine in modern America. So why should you, as a viewer, care about this figure who seems like just another villain in the endless saga of corporate scandals? Because the Shkreli story illuminates the very real ways corporate decisions affect access to medicine, how financial markets incentivize behavior, and what happens when regulation struggles to keep up with innovation. This story explains not only why a $13.50 pill jumped to $750 overnight, but also the deeper systemic forces that make these price shocks possible, and all without any meaningful checks until the public outcry becomes impossible to ignore. Martin Shkreli's rise and fall is more than a tale of one man's misconduct. It marks a stark moment in the history of pharmaceutical economics and corporate governance, highlighting tensions that will continue to shape health and wealth in the years ahead. Martin Shkreli was born in 1983 in Brooklyn, New York, to Albanian immigrant parents. He showed early signs of financial savvy, reportedly trading stocks for the first time at age 12. After earning a degree in business administration from Baruch College, he quickly gained attention in the investment world as a hedge fund manager. By his mid-20s, Shkreli was running his own hedge funds and pharmaceutical companies. What set Shkreli apart early on wasn't just his financial acumen, but his aggressive and unapologetically brash public persona. In the hedge fund world, reputation matters, but Shkreli seemed to revel in antagonizing critics and flaunting success, posting provocative statements on social media and in interviews. But it was in pharmaceuticals that Shkreli's impact became most notorious. In 2015, his company Turing Pharmaceuticals acquired the rights to Daraprim, a drug used to treat toxoplasmosis, a parasitic infection particularly dangerous for people with compromised immune systems, such as AIDS patients or cancer patients. The drug had been on the market for decades, considered essential but relatively obscure. Here's where the economics come into sharp focus. Before Turing's acquisition, Daraprim cost about $13.50 per pill. Within days, Shkreli's company raised the price to $750 per pill, an increase of over 5,000%. The justification? According to Shkreli, the company needed revenue to fund research and development for new drugs. Critics argued that with a drug on the market for over 60 years, this price spike was pure price gouging, taking advantage of a captive patient population who had no alternatives. How does price gouging like this even happen, and why does the market allow it? The answer lies in the unique economics of prescription drugs and the regulatory framework. Unlike typical consumer goods, pharmaceuticals face a paradoxical pricing environment. On one hand, drugs require immense investment, often billions of dollars, in research, trials, and regulatory approval before reaching patients. On the other hand, once a drug's patent expires, generics usually flood the market, pushing prices down. Daraprim was an old drug, off patent, but it had little competition because no generic manufacturers found it lucrative enough to produce. The drug's market was small and complicated, used primarily through hospital pharmacies or specialty treatments, limiting competition and transparency. This created a situation ripe for exploitation. When Turing acquired Daraprim's rights, it gained what economists call monopoly power over this niche market. Shkreli exploited this to dramatically raise prices, knowing that insurers and hospitals would have to pay, as the drug was medically necessary. This is a classic example of inelastic demand, where consumers can't reduce consumption despite price increases because the drug is essential. The real-world impact was immediate. Patients relying on Daraprim faced skyrocketing costs, insurers scrambled to cover the new prices, and hospitals raised alarm about the strain such increases placed on their budgets and patients. Public outrage surged, intensified by Shkreli's own taunts on social media, where he mocked journalists and critics, calling himself the most hated man in America. But beyond the emotional response lies the bigger economic picture. Shkreli's Daraprim price hike was not an isolated incident. It reflected broader trends. Over the previous decade, drug prices in the United States had been rising faster than inflation, driven by factors including patent evergreening, limited competition, and complex drug distribution systems. Frequently, pharmaceutical companies buy existing drugs with little competition and increase prices dramatically. For instance, in 2017, another company acquired the rights to a decades-old antibiotic named digoxin and raised the price from 0.9 cents a tablet to $1.44. Similar stories played out for drugs like nitroprusside and pyrimethamine, the latter ironically the same compound found in Daraprim. The pattern is clear: a market where essential drugs with niche use can be monopolized, then resold at enormous markups. How did such pricing strategies become so normalized? Part of the answer lies in healthcare regulations and patent law. Patents grant companies exclusive rights to sell new drugs, lasting typically 20 years from the date of patent filing. During this time, companies can charge high prices without competition, ostensibly to recoup research costs. But when patents expire, various tactics such as minor chemical tweaks, sometimes called evergreening, allow companies to extend protections or make generic entry more difficult. In Shkreli's case, Daraprim had no patent protection left, but the lack of competition was due to regulatory and market hurdles that kept generic manufacturers out. The FDA's slow approval process for generics and the low profit margins for producing these seldom-used drugs combined to create what economists call barriers to entry. The outcome is a system vulnerable to what's known as monopsony and monopoly sandwich dynamics, where hospitals and insurers are forced to purchase high-priced drugs from companies that face little competitive pressure, all while trying to negotiate prices in a fragmented market. Shkreli's gambit exposed these fissures in stark terms, generating a political backlash. U.S. senators, including Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, publicly denounced the price hike. The House Oversight Committee scheduled hearings with Shkreli as a witness. Pharmaceutical pricing, previously a technical policy issue, was thrust into the national spotlight. Yet, shackling Shkreli was not so simple. Within months, criminal investigations revealed that Shkreli was under investigation for securities fraud, unrelated to Daraprim's pricing. These charges stemmed from his time running hedge funds and other biotech companies before Turing Pharmaceuticals. Prosecutors accused Shkreli of running a Ponzi-like scheme, using funds from new investors to pay off earlier ones, and lying about profits. Despite his public notoriety over drug pricing, it was financial fraud that brought him to court. In August 2017, Shkreli was convicted on 2 counts of securities fraud and 1 count of conspiracy. He was sentenced in March 2018 to 7 years in prison and fined $7.4 million. The conviction was a reminder that behind the drug pricing drama were also systemic problems in financial markets: crooked hedge funds, opaque investment schemes, and regulatory lapses. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Shkreli saga lies in how it changed conversations about corporate governance and healthcare policy. After the Daraprim price spike, lawmakers proposed several reforms aimed at increasing transparency and competition in drug markets. The FDA launched initiatives to accelerate generic drug approvals. Legislation like the Creating and Restoring Equal Access to Equivalent Samples (CREATES) Act of 2019 targeted tactics that drug makers used to delay competition. States began scrutinizing pharmaceutical pricing more aggressively, and insurers experimented with alternative payment models to mitigate shocks. Additionally, the episode pushed insurers and pharmacy benefit managers to develop formularies and negotiate prices more aggressively, trying to shift cost pressures away from consumers. It became clear that the days when drug prices rose unchecked without scrutiny were ending. There are deeper lessons, too, about market power and the incentives built into the system. Shkreli's actions were legal, in a narrow sense. Buying an old drug and raising the price is not illegal, even if it feels immoral to many. This underscores the limits of regulation when market structures enable monopoly pricing. Scholars of industrial organization economics point out that markets with high fixed costs and low marginal costs, like pharmaceuticals, are prone to pricing anomalies. Once competitors are deterred by low volume or high regulatory barriers, monopolists can extract extraordinary rents. Furthermore, the role of public funding in drug development complicates the justification for sky-high prices. Research by the National Institutes of Health, NIH, funds much basic biomedical research, yet the fruits of this research mature in drugs sold by private firms at premium prices. Debates continue about how to better align public investment with affordable access. Shkreli's persona, his provocations, arrogance, and legal troubles distracted many from these structural questions. But the economics of drug pricing remain where the focus should be. The Daraprim episode is a vivid case study in how incentives, regulation, and market power combine to affect real human lives. The price spike put a strain on patients who depended on Daraprim, especially those without generous insurance coverage. Hospitals had to scramble to manage budgets. Public health programs like Medicaid faced increased costs, raising broader societal questions about sustainable healthcare financing. In response to public pressure, Shkreli's company eventually lowered the price once a competitor entered the market, demonstrating how competitive pressure can constrain monopoly power. But the delay in competition and the ease with which prices rose remains a cautionary tale about market vulnerabilities. Looking beyond Shkreli, the pharmaceutical industry continues to face scrutiny for drug pricing strategies. In 2019, the U.S. spent about $358 billion on prescription drugs, nearly 10% of total health expenditures. Analysts warn that without structural reforms, cost pressures will only mount, increasing barriers to care. At the same time, the innovation driven by pharmaceutical research has yielded remarkable advances, from cancer immunotherapies to vaccines and treatments for rare diseases. That creates a policy challenge, fostering innovation while ensuring drugs remain affordable. This balance lies at the heart of ongoing debates over patent law, Medicare negotiation powers, and drug importation policies. Martin Shkreli's story is, in essence, a flashpoint that reveals the hidden levers and tensions underlying the pharmaceutical market. It's a case study in how one individual exploited market imperfections and regulatory gaps to powerful effect, but also how those reactionary responses spurred reforms and awareness. Beyond his criminal conviction and public infamy, the Shkreli episode highlights the fragile architecture of health economics in America. The mixing of profit motives with public need, the struggle for transparency in complex markets, and the role of government oversight. For investors and policymakers, it is a reminder about the value of scrutinizing business models, incentives, and market structures rather than focusing solely on personalities. The Shkreli case was about more than greed. It was about systemic weaknesses in how drugs are priced and paid for. For patients and the public, the story underscores the stakes involved when corporate actions intersect with health. Access to medicines can literally be a matter of life and death. The gaps in regulation and market design that allowed Shkreli's price hike remain a live issue, demanding vigilance and informed policy responses. At the end of the day, Martin Shkreli isn't an isolated anomaly, but a symptom of broader dynamics at play in global pharmaceutical economics. His brief but explosive chapter in corporate history serves as a stark reminder of market power's potential for harm, and the ongoing quest to balance profit, innovation, and accessible healthcare in a complex world. If you found this story interesting, hit that like button and subscribe so we can keep making these videos. Tomorrow, we are diving into a story that is just as shocking. Three Arrows Capital, the $10 billion crypto hedge fund that imploded. You will not want to miss it. I will see you there.